Thousands of people marched against hate in New York City this weekend following a recent wave of anti-Semitic attacks. Demonstrators took over the Brooklyn Bridge on Sunday with their message, "No hate, no fear." More than a dozen attacks against the Jewish community have been reported in New York in the last 2 weeks alone, including one during a Hanukkah celebration at a rabbi's home outside the city. 5 people were stabbed.
Anti-Semitic attacks have spread far beyond New York. A new report from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University in San Bernardino finds hate crimes against Jewish people across the United States are up and on the rise. One of the report's lead authors, Brian Levin, joins us now from San Bernardino, California, with more. Brian, thanks so much for being with us. What are the key findings of the report?
In New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, we're seeing a couple of things. One is those cities overall for hate crime are at their highest level since 2001. So that's something. And by the way, these projections are now becoming reality. Los Angeles is now officially over 300. New York officially over 400. We're waiting to see Chicago, but it's already above what it was last year. So they're more than just decade highs. They're at the highest that we've seen since 2001, which was a national high. Baked into that, however, is also increases in violence. Last year, the FBI showed that while hate crimes were relatively flat, the violent ones, the person-directed ones, were up about 12%, while the property-directed ones dropped almost 20%. But anti-Semitic hate crimes, at least preliminarily, are either tied or number one in New York City, in Los Angeles, and Chicago as the number one target. We've also seen, as you've seen, extremist homicidal attacks increase. So we've seen a broadening with respect to who's involved with extremist homicides, but they're dominated by white supremacists. And let's look at this. In 2016, we only saw 3, but they were doing more public marches. Now they're not doing so many public marches post-Charlottesville, but we have at least 26 white supremacist homicides last year in the United States, and that's more than all the extremist homicides we've had for all of 2018, and it reverses a 2-year decline. So bottom line is the top 10 cities look like they're up. About 4 out of 5 times the top 10 cities predict the trend for the nation. But I think with regard to anti-Semitic hate crimes, when we look at these 3 large cities, those are among the cities where Jews in the United States are most concentrated. In the 21 top metropolitan areas, Jews are found doubly than they're found in the nation as a whole, over 4% in those cities. So bottom line is those increases may not translate across the whole country because Jews are more concentrated in cities. But bottom line, what we've seen in New York last year, anti-Jewish accounted for more than half of the over 400. In LA, we're still waiting for the final numbers, but as you can see, at least 58 out of over 300, and in Chicago, about 1/5 of all hate crimes directed again's Jews.
You know, Brian,
and they're getting more violent.
I think that it is particularly disturbing that in cities where there are a lot of Jewish people, there's a large Jewish population here in New York. It's been for a very, very long time. This should not be happening in communities where there's a familiarity with different types of ethnicities, different types of cultures, different types of religions. It's particularly disappointing, I think, when you see it in a place like New York. So, like, the key question is, why? Why is this happening now?
Well, it's actually been happening for some time. We found last year, and it wasn't widely reported, what I call the democratization of hate. Look, Jews are still the number one for religion. African Americans are still number one with regard to race. But there's an interesting reshuffling going on. African Americans were 42% of all hate crimes in '96, and it was around some political stuff, the welfare reform bill and all the stereotypes of that. There were over 3,500. 2018 down to 27%. Also, we haven't seen many years where religion crimes have been more than 20%, but most of them have been in the last 5. Bottom line, at a time when we're seeing nationalism, polarization, and conspiracy theories, I think that's an overlay. But moreover, what we're seeing in cities, and I think this doesn't just involve Jews, for instance, in Los Angeles County, 90% of the racial hate crimes are buying between people of color. So don't mistake the fact that demographic changes, population density, and neighborhood tensions, these local demographics and local tensions can be these tectonic plates which intersect with more broad things like terror attacks and political catalysts, which we've also seen bump things up. So bottom line is, in the major cities, neighborhood conflicts and demographic changes affect things more nationally and episodically. What we're seeing is hate crimes spike around terror attacks. We've been seeing that, obviously, but also around political events like elections. The two worst months for this decade for hate crime were around the midterm election in 2018 and November 2016 when we had the presidential election. And the day after the election in 2016 was the worst day since 2003.
Brian, I don't know if your report dug into this, but you sort of touched a little bit on it right there in your answer. As you were speaking, I was thinking about all the conversations Vlad and I have had talking about the last election and the upcoming election and the use of fake news and controversial memes and just the way in which the internet has been used and abused to exacerbate divisions for other reasons. And often what we've learned now is in an attempt to influence an election, there has been information put out there that, like I said before, exacerbates our divisions. Are you finding that that is a factor?
Absolutely, and it was in some of our previous reports. Listen to this. In the 2016 election, and this is according to USA Today and the Homeland Security Committee minority side, at least at that time, found that there were over 3,500 fake Russian Facebook ads, for instance. And they broadly tried them out. But the most effective ones, they really spiked. So what we saw was a tripling of racially divisive, according to the USA Today, a tripling of these Facebook ads in the run-up to the last election. And it lagged the increase in hate crimes by about a month. And we did some charting on that. We also saw increases in hate speech over the internet. So it appears it's sometimes a convergence of a bunch of things. One, hate crimes going up. Two, extremist plots around the election. And also, not only attempts to manipulate it by malevolent actors, but also by foreign actors by putting gasoline on that internet fire. One thing real briefly, we're also seeing a dissipation of many of these groups to more affinity-based platforms where we're having these micro cultures of a couple of hundred people who are their own types of bigots. So we're seeing a buffet, a democratization of hate where the main targets are still being hit, but we're seeing a bit of a reshuffling. Latinos were up significantly over the last year or two as anti-Muslim hate crimes went down. But if we're looking at international conflict, I would urge police departments all over the country to look at both Jewish, Arab, and Muslim-related sites and events with increased scrutiny for protection, because we know hate crimes go up around catalytic events like wars and elections.
We got to wrap this up, but I just need one sentence from you. You said something that was really interesting. You said the majority of these attacks, according to your report, have been carried out by white supremacists. There was some criticism over that attack in Rockland County that because the person who committed that attack was a black person, a person of a marginalized community, that the press didn't report it. Are you seeing that the overwhelming number, what is the demographic of people committing these hate crimes in just like 10 seconds?
Sure. But with regard to the homicides, it's mostly white. We have seen some racial supremacists from people of color commit a smattering of homicides over the past few years. We expect that to continue. But overall in New York City, for instance, the majority of anti-Semitic hate crimes in New York, about 53%, were done by whites, about 42% were done by African Americans, but that's basically in line with the hate crime offenders for the city overall last year.
Got it. Okay, really interesting. That's why we kept this segment going, Brian, because this report is really fascinating, and ultimately it's really heartbreaking to know that this is happening in 2020. Brian Levin, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And the bully pulpit is important. Political leaders should tone it down.
Great
advice. Thank you, Brian.